So this is my 32nd lecture in residency. I counted them. Which I can't believe. It doesn't seem like that many because they've kind of thinned out. But I have vivid memories of first year where we were lecturing every 3 weeks to each other. And it was just me, Leaf, Sarah, and Dr. Matisse. And we did a lot of lectures. And thank heavens all of you guys came on board to spread that well. But so 32 lectures. Yeah, I think this year, there's only like my third-ish or fourth maybe. But anyway, so my 32nd lecture. This picture was one of my favorite moments in residency. This was in the Dominican Republic. Hopefully you guys will be able to go again maybe next year. I haven't heard with Dr. Wyatt, but the month that we went, I had a particularly challenging couple of shifts just before we left. Challenging in that I just had a bunch of kind of belligerent patients that were unappreciative, and we got to the DR and saw this just pile of people that had come to get free care from these American doctors, and most of them have nothing wrong with them. I mean, just little minor stuff, but they were so appreciative. And they just couldn't get it, they couldn't thank us enough for coming to help them just a little bit. And so these 3 super cute girls represented one of my favorite moments that reminded me why I chose to go into medicine in the first place. So I spent 2 years in South Africa, and many of you probably know that. And this is a picture in South Africa. This hut belongs to a tribe of people called the Xhosas. I'm sorry, my voice is a little bit shaky. I don't think I've been this nervous for a lecture since first year. But I vividly remember, before I get into this, I vividly remember my very first lecture was on a COPD exacerbation. I remember Dr. Matisse and Dr. Ferraro's eyes. I felt like burning into my soul from the back of the room, like, all right, they had no idea who I was. I had no idea who they were. But I remember vividly my voice shaking in that lecture. I'm so scared, and naturally I had procrastinated. I'm a very efficient procrastinator. And of the 32 lectures I've given, I've probably averaged 2 to 3 hours of sleep a night the night before, on average. Sometimes I've gone the whole night with no sleep, and then I give the lecture. Sometimes I get a lot, like 4. But that's just the way I function. And I do my best work when it's go time, and so I kind of intentionally put it off and then go as fast as I can. But so I didn't want to ruin my regimen, and I've been prepping for this for months in my head. But every time I would sit down to put it together, it wouldn't come together. And then the last 4 days, I've just been throwing it all together finally. So, needless to say. So these are the Xhosas. And I spent 2 years with these people. And they taught me amazing things. And they're phenomenal people. The heritages are so rich in South Africa. You go to Africa and expect to see very rich cultural heritage, but a lot of it's been lost and dissipated. But in sub-Saharan Africa, it's still really rich and really thick. They've held on to a lot of their traditions, and it's really cool. This is a photo that I took. We came across this pack of elephants in this game park called Addo Elephant Park. And this is only some of them. We actually came across about 100 all at the same time, which is super cool. So this is them. They have lots of traditions. They're phenomenally loving people. We would regularly just walk into homes. We'd go in the back door. We'd just show up and open the door and walk in. And just say, hey, is anybody home? And they'd come out, oh, who's here? And they'd come and they'd sit us down and they'd bring us like a soda and some cookies, and then they'd sit down and then ask us why we were there. And it was phenomenal. That was almost every home that we went to. And I went to thousands of homes in the 2 years that I was there. So that's all we did. We knocked doors and went inside homes. And this two Xhosa women in their traditional garb. That's me in my pre-grays. I used to not have quite so many grays, but this is a Sangoma, so a witch doctor, an ancient a healer. So not a witch. They do practice some witchery, which is kind of cool, but we're not going to talk about that. But anyway, this was a really neat creature because usually they won't let you take pictures with them. And finally, right towards the end of my 2 years, almost every time I see one, I'd ask if I could get a picture, and they're like, no, they won't touch you because they think it inhibits their healing powers if they touch you. So they'll usually carry a stick, and they'll let you shake their stick. But anyway, she let me take a picture with her, which I was thrilled about. There's two more Xhosa mamas. So this is the tradition I want to talk about. So the Xhosa young men between the ages of 18 and 24-ish go to the bush. And they go to the bush to become men. And the women do it too. The women, it's slightly different because women don't have to get circumcised. But the men go to get circumcised. And it's a I have mixed emotions on this tradition. In some regard, it's a terrible tradition. In 2012, over 8,000 of these young men died in the bush because of multiple things, but mainly because of dehydration. They don't let them drink anything. Right after they circumcise them, I think it's some sign of purity and strength or whatever, but they don't let them drink anything for like 72 hours, like anything. And so a lot of them get dehydrated and die. Some get infection. Obviously, they're using who knows what to perform these circumcisions. So that part of this tradition is obviously questionable. But the part I like is the fact that they go to grow up, and they go there to put away their childhood. And before they go, they take their wardrobe and box it up. And they put it away, and they never put on a piece of clothing again that they've worn prior to going to the bush. And after they go to the bush, they come home, get a whole new wardrobe. They end up being there typically these days. Back in the day, they'd go for months at a time. These days, they go for about 3 weeks. And while they're out there, they paint their bodies white as a symbol of purity and dedication and humility. And while they're out there, they go in groups. The first 72 hours while they're fasting, they huddle in these little white blankets, and no one's allowed to visit them. They have elders that are out there with them that are teaching them the traditions of their tribe and whatnot. And then after the 72 hours, then for the next 3 weeks, they hang out together and they learn what it means to become a man or to become an adult, and the responsibilities they now have to take as somebody that's been to the bush. And then when they come back into the town, they put on this really earthy toned kind of dress wear. They all wear like these suit coats like you see here, and then they paint their faces yellow. And they go around the village for like 6 months, yellow, and they're not allowed to say anything to anybody. They keep their mouths shut. They can speak to each other and to the elders that were with them in the bush, but otherwise they can't talk to anybody for 6 months. And that's their way of introducing themselves to the village, saying, I've been, and it's also their way of saying, I'm receptive of everything this village has to teach me. So, we don't paint ourselves in white, but we dress in white. And I think there are phenomenal analogies with going to the bush, with coming to residency. I thought I've been to the bush multiple times in my life until I came to residency. And I think that coming to residency was going to the bush for me. I'm thrilled that I didn't get circumcised while here. That was taken care of long ago.
Thank you.
Thank heavens. Dr. Matisse said something really interesting to me about a year ago. We were hanging out on a shift, and I think there were some medical students there or something, and he was talking to me indirectly, but said to whoever was there with us, Dr. Garrett's my most serious resident. And it kind of struck me as strange for some reason. Because my whole life until residency, I didn't view myself as a serious person. I viewed myself as very carefree and lighthearted and solely intent on having a good time. And that's how I lived my life for a long time. And when I got to residency, and I've said this a few times to you guys, but when I first got here as an intern, I was scared to death when I walked in here. And the orientation made me more scared. And the lunch with Dr. Melanie and Dr. Matisse and Dr. Ferraro made me more scared. And they told us, that we better be taking this serious. And I did, and I was quiet. For a long time, I was quiet. Not necessarily consciously and not by choice, but because I was scared, and I knew that when I showed up, that there were amazing elders in this place that had a lot to teach me, and I didn't have much to say for those first few years, and so I felt like I was in the bush. Especially intern year, for those interns out there. I felt like especially intern year, you're in the bush. Maybe the next few years you start painting your face yellow. You put on the brown coat, maybe. But especially that first year, you're in the bush. So, the hardest part about putting this talk together was figuring out what on earth to make it about. And so I synthesized 4 things that I want to focus on. One, the conscious decision to have a better life. And not a one-time decision, but a continual decision to have a better life. And to not only have a better life, to help everybody else have a better life. 2, the powerful people and life-changing moments in my life that have steered my life in the direction that I'm so grateful for. 3rd, this idea that you can do hard things. This was a quote by my mother-in-law, Patricia Gillespie, and I was introduced to this quote when I married my wife. Her mom used to tell her this all the time: "You can do hard things. You can do them." And it's kind of become a subconscious theme in our home, that you can do hard things, and we tell our kids that you can do hard things, and don't be afraid to do hard things. And some people take that for granted. Some people just do hard things. Dr. Matisse, I don't know if he learned to do hard things, but he loves hard things. I feel like he's almost dedicated his life to doing hard things. But that was not intuitive to me. Like I said, my whole life, I was doing fun things. Not hard things. And because of the people in my life, I've found out the value in doing hard things. And then finally, there were a bunch of things that I've learned in residency that I didn't know which category to throw in. So there's a bunch of little tiny lessons that are other things I learned while in the bush. So, just a quick background. So this is my family. This is my immediate family, including a few in-laws. I think there's 4 in-laws in there, but otherwise those are my brothers and sisters, and my 3 kids at the time, and that's it. So I have a massive family. I'm the second of 10 kids, and I had a fantastic time growing up with these people. I'm still quite close with almost all of them, and we have a great time together. We laugh our heads off when we get together, and I have a great family. This is us in our a little bit younger years. My parents had 7 children on their own, and then ended up adopting 3 older kids from Ukraine later. So this was us before they had adopted anybody. This is my dad and my mom, and there's me when I'm about 15, I think. Then that's brother 3, 4. First daughter was 5, 6, and then 7 is somewhere in the womb still. We spent a lot of time at lakes, doing a lot of that. And this was my life. I was intent to water ski as much as possible. My dad's a water ski fanatic. He water skied competitively when he was young. And so he has a boat, and he needed someone to go water skiing with him a lot, and I was his guy. And so summertime, we'd go twice a week not summertime, we'd go twice a week from the beginning of April or end of March until the end of October. And in Utah, in July, the lakes are freezing. In April and October, sometimes we're skiing with like ice on the edges of the lake. So we'd throw on dry suits and fill them up with hot water, like a shower, and then jump in the water and take off as fast as we could. And then we'd get back in the water, or back in the boat, and put the shower in our dry suit and fill it back up with hot water. So we were a little bit fanatical about it. But we loved water skiing. So this was one of my very first times barefooting. As you can tell, I was having a great time. The other aspect of my life that I have done a lot of is music. I grew up doing a ton of music. And my mom labeled me early as the musician in the family. And my mom was, the other side, she was fanatical about music. And she put us in everything music that you can imagine. When I was, how old? I was probably 13. One day I was in on the piano with my eyes closed, just plunking out notes, these random notes, and she came in and she's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I know the white ones. I'm just trying to see if I know the black ones." And she started screaming, and I was like, "What is wrong with you, Mom?" And she's like, "You have perfect pitch." I didn't know what that was, but apparently it was a big deal in the music world to have perfect pitch. But little things like that happened that convinced my mom that I was the musician, and that I was destined to do music, and so I did a ton of it, and had a great time doing it. So this is me in high school, in a musical in Bye Bye Birdie. It was moments like this that inappropriately convinced me that being on stage is amazing. The first time I walked on stage for this show, I was in this gold outfit, and I didn't walk on until the 7th scene of the show. So there's all this prelude, and the show's about an Elvis Presley figure. It's the Elvis Presley story as he preps to go to war. And so I walked on in the 7th scene with my 2 bodyguards, and the audience started screaming, and I broke character and started smiling. and again, being on stage is not nearly what that moment was, but from that point on, I was like, whoa, I need some more of that. And it was a weird high and whatever. So that was one of my Bye Bye Birdie outfits. But anyway, this was another performing group that my wife and I were actually in together. This is how we met, was in this performing group. We went over to Europe and sang and danced together and had a great time. So, So my career in music led me into college, and I got a full tuition scholarship to the University of Utah for vocal performance, and my voice teacher in high school took me up and auditioned me with this big wig opera star at the University of Utah, who's on the opera circuit, and I know you guys probably didn't even know there was an opera circuit. It's a small group that knows about it, even in the music world, but there is an opera circuit. And most of it's in Europe. And so he would travel all the time to Germany and Italy doing operas, and then he'd come back to the University of Utah to teach. And this guy agreed to take me on as a freshman, and I was the only freshman in his studio, and I thought it was such an honor to be in his studio. Everything was hunky-dory. And then he let me know when I got in the studio that I was going to be an opera singer. He said, if I take you on as a student, you're going to be an opera singer. Professionally. This is what you do. This is what you'll do for your career. And that stressed me out like crazy. Everything was fun until I had to be an opera singer. And I liked singing classical music. It was fun. But all of a sudden to try to figure out how to make a career, and I watched his career. He was gone 2/3 of the year, traveling all over the United States, all over Europe. He made okay money, but not great. And it was a tough life. It was way tough. He had tons of respect at the University of Utah, but it was a tough life. And I wasn't convinced that I wanted that, but I faked it. And said, of course, I'm gonna be an opera singer. And I faked it for a couple of years. He finally kind of saw through it. I kind of realized after about 2.5 years of me taking voice from him that I just wasn't into it. I think he realized it. I probably before I did. But my point in bringing all of that up is that up until that point, I hadn't really done anything hard in my life. Even when I took voice lessons from really intense, amazing teachers, I didn't practice that much, to be honest. I practiced a few hours a week, but they were expecting 3 or 4 hours of intense singing, and I could fudge my way through. I tested out of a couple of years worth of music classes my first couple of years, and it was easy. It was easy for me. It really was. But again, I hadn't really done anything that was hard yet at that point. So this is probably the most famous Xhosa of all the Xhosas. This is Nelson Mandela. And he grew up in the Transkei of South Africa, which was right by where I lived at one point in South Africa. And he is a person that knew how to do hard things. For those of you who know his history, he was in prison for 27 years. He was a freedom fighter. And he fought for the freedom of black people in South Africa, and they put him in prison for 27 years. And while he was in prison, he happened to be in prison with all of his political activists, buddies, and they made them mine limestone quarries for years and years and years. And they had this cave where they would go have lunch every day. And somehow they snuck some papers into the prison, and in this cave every day they would meet, and they would plan out their government in this cave. And so when he finally stepped out of prison in 1990, he worked for 4 years, got all of his buddies released from prison. In 1994, South Africa went from a completely white government to a completely black government in one election. And they took what they had formed in prison and just stepped into power as the government in South Africa. And this is one of his quotes. "It always seems impossible until it's done." I think medical school seemed impossible when I was at the beginning of it. Maybe some of you felt that same way. Medical school scared me to death. By the time I got to the end, I think it wasn't nearly as scary as I thought it was. Residency scared me to death. At the end, it's easy to say that now. I think it was as hard as I thought it was going to be, or harder probably. But there were times where I didn't think it was possible, where I thought, oh my gosh, I can't survive this. I remember one day, I think it was the end of my second year approximately. I was walking down the hall, and I'd had a rough shift or whatever. And I was walking down the hall, and one of the nursing staff from the floor passed me, and she said, "Hang in there, you're almost done." And I was like, "Oh gosh, I look that bad." But there were moments like that, and there were many moments when we were in the bush. My first year, where I thought, "Oh my gosh, I don't know how I'm going to do this for 4 more years." But now at the end of this, it's amazing, how possible it seems now. So this is one of the first hard things I did. I don't know if you can see that sign. It says mattress outlet, but right above it says Garrett. So I owned a mattress store for a little while. I don't know. Well, I'm unlike most of you, I obviously didn't plan to go into medicine until late. And so I dabbled in some weird things, but I was in my second or third year of undergrad doing as a music major, and my older, wiser brother, came to me with this deal and said, I've got some buddies and get us some cheap mattresses. We can open a retail location. I think we can make it fly. I'm busy. This is him talking. I'm busy with my other business. I need you to run it. And I'm sitting there thinking, you're really smart. It sounds great. Let's do it. This is one of the first hard things I did. This was one of my first big failures. We totally flopped. We were open for about 9 months. We lost. I guess we could have flopped way bigger. We lost about $20,000 by the time we shut our doors. But this is one of the first moments in my life where I realized it's okay to fail. It's okay to try something really big and scary, and totally fail. And my brother and I, up until that point, were not that close, and we became best friends because of this complete failure. And so I count it as one of the most, like up to that point, it was one of the most valuable things that had happened to me in my life, to learn that lesson. So this is one of the, I told you I was going to talk about powerful people that changed the course of my life. This is a lady by the name of Delora Garrett, and she was my grandma. And she is one of the most special people I've ever met. She has a phenomenal way about her. When you're around my grandma, you think you are the most interesting person she's ever met. And she has a phenomenal way of doing that. When I was on my way to the opera circuit, I thought she thought that was the most interesting thing she'd ever heard. She had a couple books about opera that she pulled off her shelves and said, I was thumbing through these. You got to take a look at them. Every time I was around her, she'd ask me what I was learning in my music classes and what interesting classical musical pieces I'd been working on. My brother was majoring in philosophy at the time. He would go to speak to her, and she would ask him all about philosophy, and be able to rattle off like amazingly insightful things about philosophy. My other brother was majoring in psychology, and he would go and speak to her about psychology, and she'd be able to hang with him speaking about psychology. She had some characteristics that allowed her to do this. One, she was endlessly curious. She was an avid reader. She was uneducated. She dropped out of high school when she was 17, got married to my grandpa, didn't ever go to college. She got a job when she was in her early 20s. A blind physician hired her and said, I have a ton of things to read and no way to read them. Would you mind coming over to my house 3 or 4 times a week reading to me. So she would go over to this physician's house for a couple hours, 3 or 4 times a week, and she would read whatever he wanted to read. She'd read the newspaper, she'd read his medical books, she'd read his business books, his religion, whatever he wanted to read, she would read to him. And she did this for like 10 years. And she says that was my college education. And she said he was an amazingly intelligent man, and he taught me everything I could have ever dreamed of learning in college. And so that inspired her to go on and keep reading. And when you go to her house, she just has this massive library, and you can pull off any book, and she can talk out of that book. So she's endlessly curious. It's hard to pinpoint why else, but she has an ability when you're around her to just make you feel like you need to go conquer the world. And there aren't very many people that you meet like that. That after being around them, you feel like, okay, I need to do better. I need to go apply myself more. I need to accomplish more. And they don't tell you to do it. She never told me to do anything. But after being around her, every time I wanted to go accomplish more. And I'll be forever grateful because of that. This is the next powerful person that I met in my life. And much like my grandma, and we named our first daughter Savannah Delora, by the way, after my grandma. But much like my grandma, I found that when I met this person, when I had been so committed in my life to doing everything I possibly could that was fun, all of a sudden I found myself committed to doing everything I could to make my life better and more effective and more efficient and more meaningful. And she didn't ask me to do that. When she met me, I was on track to be a high school choir teacher, perform in musical theater or opera, run a recording studio. I don't know what she was marrying into. And she jokes and reminds me, hey, look, I didn't marry a doctor. I married someone that was going to be poor and that was going to figure out how to provide. But when I would be around her, I all of a sudden, and this happened subconsciously, it wasn't until years later that I look back and realized from the moment I met her that I've wanted my life to be dramatically different. And I don't know, I can't pinpoint why she makes me do that, but she does. And again, I'll be eternally grateful that she has done that. If I were single right now and had never met her, I'd probably be water skiing a lot still. I eventually will do that again a lot. But that's probably about all my life would consist of. Would be having a fun time. Because that was super important to me until I met this person. So I decided to marry her. So this was the next. I mean, it's a little bit embarrassing, but this is the next kind of hard thing I did. I got a manual labor job, and this was. I did this for about 3 or 4 summers, right before we got married, and then the first couple years we were married. My dad sells these things, and so I hopped on his installation crew, and I started installing playgrounds and water slides. And it was hard work, and at first I didn't like it, but I learned to like it. In fact, I learned to like it a lot. I would come home and be so physically exhausted because I wasn't in great shape. I had these girly hands. The only calluses I had on my hands were from water skiing. So I'd had them right there, but nowhere else. But anyway, I learned to like hard work, and this job convinced me that I can do hard work for long periods of time. And building water slides is hard work. Typically, we have 4 guys on. This is me right here. There's 5 guys putting this big piece in, but typically it was just me and John on this crew. And we would do almost everything until we'd fly these big pieces, and then we'd get a couple other guys to help us fly these pieces in. But we're bolting. I don't know if you can see. There's little teeny tiny bolts, and you're drilling every single one of those holes. And it's like 90 degrees, summertime, and you have fiberglass up your arms, and it itches like crazy. It hurts. So it's a terrible job, and I feel bad for guys that have to do it forever. But it was a fantastic job. It taught me that I can work hard, and that I don't need to be afraid of working hard, and I learned to really like it. And every time we finished the water slide, I built probably 7 or 8 big slides like this in my time doing it. Every time we would finish one, you would step back and have an amazing feeling of accomplishment. Like I built that thing, and it was really valuable to me. And every once in a while, I'd go with my dad to put the pump in, and then we'd be the first one to be able to try it out, which is fun too. This is the next hard thing I did, and I was so tentative to include all these hard things I've done. I'm not telling you this to say, look at all the hard things I did. I'm telling you this to say that the hard things were hard for me. But doing a lot of them and meeting people that convinced me to do them has changed my life and has made me realize that there's extreme value in doing hard things. So this is me crossing the finish line of the Kentucky Derby Marathon. It's the first marathon I've run. I haven't run one since, but I'm planning to. I have big plans because my time was terrible in this marathon. I had big plans to be under about 3:40, and I crossed the finish line in 4:40. But I don't care because I crossed the finish line. What you can't see very well, you would think that they're at the finish line cheering me on, but they're not. These are my 2 daughters, and this is my wife, and my son is the baby bump. And my 2 little girls, and that's not the finish line. That's the 12-mile mark. And I asked them to be at the 12-mile mark because the marathon and half marathon splits at the 12-mile mark, and the half marathoners keep going, and they're a mile away from being done, and you can almost hear the crowd. And then you turn and head into like industrial Louisville. And it's daunting. And I'd heard that. I read reviews that when you turn that 12 miles, you feel like a ton of bricks just drops on you. You're like, holy crap, I've got 14.2 more miles to go, and it doesn't look good. You just run through Churchill Downs. During the first half of the marathon, you run underground into Churchill Downs. The horses are running around you. It's phenomenal, the first half. The first 12 miles are great. And then at the 12-mile mark, you turn and face these next 14.2 miles. And so I knew at that moment that I had never done this before. And I knew that I needed them to be at that point. And she gave me a new shirt. She brought me, I had a different shirt on for the first 12 miles. I sweat profusely. I knew, my nipples would probably be raw if I didn't get a new dry shirt. And I knew that most of my sweat would be out by this point. She brought me a new shirt. She brought me a banana, a Snickers, a Gatorade, and a water. And so I took about a 3-minute pit stop, and we changed rapidly and took a few pictures. And I said, thank you, I love you so much, and then took off. And the next 14.2 miles were as hard as I thought they'd be. There were moments where I thought I was going to die, and I thought I'd trained pretty good. I trained up to 22 miles a couple times, but it had been like 50, 55 degrees when I'd been training. It was a springtime marathon, and this heat wave came, and when I crossed the finish line, it was 86 degrees, and I wasn't prepped for it at all. And at like mile 17, I was so famished, and I had been drinking as much as I could. But at mile 17, I was like, oh my gosh, I felt like I'm going to die. I mean, people were handing out food. People were handing out like chips and like gummies, and I was taking everything that anyone could. There were these weird gummy orange slices that runners were like dropping as they were running. I was picking them up out of the because I was so famished, and I felt like I really might collapse if I don't keep eating. But anyway, so I did it, and I was thrilled to cross that finish line. And the other side of the story that you don't see is my wife's 7.5 months pregnant at this point. She ended up walking about 4 miles to get from the hotel that we were staying in. We didn't. All the roads were blocked. We couldn't get anywhere by car. So she walked from the hotel to the 12-mile point, and then to the finish line. So she ends up walking like 4.5 miles, 7.5 months pregnant. And stupid me, all I can think of is, I did it! So anyway, she did it too.
Go me.
So as I was prepping for medical school, the task of getting into medical school, I think, felt as daunting as any task I've faced. And there were moments where I thought, holy crap, I don't think I'm going to get in. I will never forget sitting in my first general physiology class, and the professor said, how many of you are pre-med? In this class, it's University of Utah. It's, there's 35,000 kids at the school, and in this class, there's like 300 kids. How many of you are pre-med? And like 60% of the class raises their hand. And he said, how many of you are pre-dental? And another 15% pre-nursing, optometry, whatever. Like the whole class is pre-professional people. And this was one of my first science classes. I'd had general biology as a freshman. That was my only science class in college. And I was sitting in physiology going, oh my gosh, these people have been prepping their whole life for this. I have perfect pitch. But I don't know jack crap about human physiology. And it scared me to death. My intro, I had to take intro to chemistry. I'd never taken any type of chemistry in high school. I took intro to chemistry in college. And that class scared me to death. It got better as time went on, but until I got to organic chemistry. And this is when I kind of hit the wall, and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to get in. And let me backtrack a little bit. The moment that I decided to go to medical school was 6 months after we got married. We were on Christmas break, and we had got married in June, so we're on Christmas break. I'm about a year away from graduating in music. My wife is a semester away from graduating. I looked at how much high school teachers make. And about a month before that, maybe the last couple weeks before that, we found out my wife was pregnant with her first daughter. And we'd been married for 6 months. And so I sat down with her on Christmas break, and we were in our living room, and I said, love, I got to do something else. I said, I can do music. I bet I could make a career out of it. I bet I could, succeed and do fine. But I'm never going to see you. I'm never going to see our kids. And not only that, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to turn to you and say, I need you to work full time, and you're never going to see our kids. And that was a big priority to us. This little bun in the oven all of a sudden became a major priority to us. And I said, I got to do something else. And I had no idea what. And we went to my parents' house, and we were on one day, like the next day, we were on the computer. We were looking up jobs, like occupations. We looked up what it means to be a firefighter, what it takes to be a firefighter. We looked up what it takes to become an airline pilot. Because I thought those would be 2 jobs that I could do, I think. And the next day, I was at the University of Utah, and I got a phone call from my dad, and I called him back, and he so wisely said, I saw you looking at occupations. And he had dabbled with the idea of being an airline pilot at one time, and he said, why don't you go be a doctor? And in the back of my mind, I was thinking, because it's hard. Because I can't do hard things. I convinced myself that I wasn't the type of person that did hard things. I had been in one AP class in high school, and I dropped out my second week of class. It was AP biology, of all things. And I got into the second week, and I was about 70 pages behind in the required readings, and thought, holy crap, I gotta bail. I'm going to fail this class. So I bailed. My first hard physical manual labor job was washing dishes at an ice cream shop my junior year of high school. I got the job. I was thrilled. It was my first hard job. Up until this point, I taught piano lessons and taught voice lessons and made okay money at it, but again, those were easy jobs. And that job, after 1 week of the job, I handed in my resignation. I said, I can't do that. That's hard. It smells terrible back there. I'm getting all this food and crap all over me when the sprayer's up too high, and it hits the trays, and sprays in my face. And so I said, I'm not doing that. So I put in my 2 weeks. I worked a total of 3 weeks. And those were the experiences that had led me to this point. My dad said, why don't you go be a doctor? I've always thought you had the capability and the mind to be a doctor. And I didn't say it, but again, I was thinking, I'm not the person that does that. I've met these type of people that do that, but I'm not one of those type of people. I'm your water ski buddy. I'm the musician. But I'm not one of the people that does hard things. And I sat on it for a second, and then he said, I want you, in his words, I want you to fill the measure of your creation. I want you to reach your potential. And I think you should give it some thought. I said, okay, yeah, I'll definitely give it some thought. The next day, I was in the pre-med office gathering all the papers and looking at them. And that day, I decided, I'm going to be a doctor. And I didn't look back. And it was 2.5 years later, I was in med school and cruising. But anyway, this moment in organic chemistry was one of the moments where, in my preparation, where I really questioned whether I'd be able to do it. And this is my brother, and that's my chubbier brother. Where's Dr. Karnendran? He's been giving me such a hard time, but I'm a lot smaller than I used to be. Anyway, beside the point. Different battle. But this is my older brother, the one that conned me into starting the Garrett mattress outlet. I watched him. And how am I doing on time? You got to go, huh? It's 11:41. Okay. He got a 17 on the ACT. For those that took the SAT and not the ACT, that's a terrible score. And he was labeled in first grade by a wicked woman, wicked first grade teacher, that he was one of the dumb kids. And he believed it his entire life, up until he graduated from high school. He was one of the dumb kids. He got C's all the way from high school. He graduated with a 2.4 from high school. He had no intention to go to college. He was an amazing worker. He always had jobs. He always had hard jobs in high school. He was laying asphalt, and he was working at McDonald's for a while, and he was doing the hard jobs that I couldn't do. But he wasn't going to college. My dad didn't graduate from college, so he wasn't going to college. My dad did fine. And he lived in London for a couple of years, doing the same thing I did in South Africa. And he lived in Brixton. He lived in not Cambridge, Oxford. He lived in Oxford, England, right in the midst of Oxford University, which is the equivalent of Harvard in England. And he hung out with really smart people for a few months. And he knew a lot about building websites at that time, when that was a new thing back in 1997 when he was there. And he started teaching some of them how to build websites. And they were, these super smart college students were gobbling it up, saying, whoa. And they were just like churning, like trying to get as much as they could from him. And that was the first moment in his life where someone had believed that he was smart. And he came home from that experience and started kind of testing that and realized that he was smart, one of the smart kids, not one of the dumb kids. He went to the community college and got a 4.0 at the community college. Went to the University of Utah, got a 4.0, and then transferred to Columbia. And this is him graduating from undergrad from Columbia University, an Ivy League school. So he wasn't one of the dumb kids. But anyway, so all of that happened during this Garrett Mattress Outlet time, and I'm in organic chemistry, and I'm doing terribly, and I get a D on one of my exams, and I call him. Because I looked up to him, by this point, I looked up to him a lot at what he'd accomplished, and I called him, and I said, dude, I don't think I'm going to get in. I think I'm going to fail organic chemistry. I'm not going to get into medical school. And this is the advice that he gave me. He said, you got to walk a little faster. And then, right after that, he said, the smartest guy doesn't win. The hardest worker does. He said, don't be intimidated by all the smart kids in your class. He said, at Columbia, I've seen 1,000 smart kids that are going to do terribly in life because they're super smart and they're super lazy and they don't know how to work. He said, so put your nose down, walk a little faster, and work a little harder, and work harder than the next day. Work harder than you think you know how to work. And you'll get in. And he convinced me. He convinced me that, okay, if I do that, maybe that'll work. So I'll try it. So I barely passed organic chemistry. But it worked. And still to this day, when things are starting to feel heavy, and like I've got way too much to do, and like I'm not going to accomplish it, I think, okay, walk a little faster. I got to walk a little faster. And I physically do. When I'm walking around the hospital, I walk a little faster. And it convinces me that I can do this. So this isn't the things I've learned in residency. I was looking at the list from Tintinelli's, just topics, and I was going to cruise through things I've learned, and then I quickly realized that you learn a bajillion things in residency, and that would be boring to plow through all of those things. And, But I was amazed when I started looking through the list of how many things you learn in 4 years. You have moments where you're in this OBGYN twilight for the last month, where I forget that I'm an emergency medicine resident. And then I start looking at this list, and I was like, holy crap, we've covered a lot of material in the last 4 years. But so anyway, this last portion of my talk, they're not things I've learned, but the lessons that I've learned. Where's lessons? Here it comes. Wait for it. Where'd it go? All right, so things we're learning in the bush. This is a quote that I stole from the MRAP guys, from Napoleon Bonaparte. You do not rise to the occasion in combat. You sink to the level of your training. My first day in the emergency department as a medical student, I had been on family medicine rotation, an outpatient internal medicine rotation, and then I was in the ED in September of my third year. And I had, I was ill prepared to be in the emergency department that early in my third year. And within 7 or 8 minutes of being in the department at 6:30 in the morning, they call a code blue. And then one of the nurses turns and looks at me, and he's like, medical student, code blue, yeah! And I was like... And I didn't know what that entailed. I knew, we'd had ACLS, but that was as close to a code as I'd been. And up to that point, I'd never seen somebody die, ever. So this was going to be my first moment. And EMS arrived within 5 minutes. And granted, I had not met anyone in the department yet. I had met my attending, and that was it. And I walk into this code, and my attending looks at me and says, "Grab some gloves." So I hurry and put some gloves on. I walk over, and they're starting to do this code. My attending's prepping to do a central line. He's running the code, and I'm just standing there. And he looks at me. He's like, "You, bag." I was like, "Okay." So one of the nurses hands me the bag. They didn't even let me hold the bag. I was just squeezing the bag. They had a light that would flash every 6 seconds. So like squeeze when that light turns on. So I'm looking at this light, squeezing this bag. And I'm trying, I've heard that you got to make friends with the nurses. So I'm like, "Hi, I'm Morgan, by the way." "Hey, how you doing?" But I'm totally like ramped up. The energy is flowing like crazy, and I have this total adrenaline rush from what I'm about to see. And sure enough, we don't revive him, and he dies. And then within like 2 minutes, it's time for morning report. And so I walk out of there, and I walk to morning report, and I go to sign in, and I take the pen, and I'm shaking so bad I can't even sign my name. I'm like, "Oh my gosh." So I sign in. So that's my first moment. That day, we had 3 code blues. All died. My attending looked at me and said, "What kind of black cloud are you?" And at that moment, I wasn't convinced that I was going to do emergency medicine. That was traumatic to see that my first day. I thought I would like it, but this is a little much. 3 months ago, I was sitting in the emergency department. And this is a little bit cavalier, and I hesitate to share this, but we hear a code blue come in. I'm sitting next to Jeannie. We hear a code blue coming in. And again, I'll qualify what I'm about to say, but I turned to Jeannie, and I said, "Time to play." And again, that would sound so cold and cavalier and mean to anybody else, but because that's not what I meant. What I meant is, this is what we do. And Jeannie knew that. And Dr. Matisse told us early when we were first years, and maybe when we were second years, I think our current third years were there when he was talking about this. He said, "You'll see us screwing around in the department. You'll see us being lighthearted and joking, but you guys can't do that. You guys don't have the ability to do that yet." So we can turn it on and turn it off. Why? Because of their training. That very first moment when I was in the ER squeezing that bag, I had no idea what to do for that guy. I had no idea. I'd passed ACLS. I'd passed the first 2 years of medical school. I'd passed my first set of boards. And I had no idea, really, what to do for that guy, except squeeze the stupid bag every time this light comes on. And then 2 months ago, I said, "It's time to play." Again, with no disrespect to an individual's life that's about to die. Meaning, we've been training for this. It's time to save this guy's life. Next lesson. Everyone lies. Next lesson. Believe everybody. The very first time I was super offended by a patient lying to me was this like 27-year-old girl that looked not a classic drug seeker. I think I was in my first year still, but she was really nice. She had chronic pancreatitis that had caused her severe pain. Her dad was a physician, and he had just passed away. And she told me this huge story, and she said, "You remind me of him." And she got choked up a little bit. She got a little bit teary-eyed and said, I just can't help but think of my dad when I see you as an intern." And I totally bought it. And I had so much empathy for her. I felt so bad for her. She's in chronic pain from this pancreatitis. So I gave her some pain medicine, and I worked her up, and she didn't have pancreatitis. She didn't have anything wrong that I could see. And then I checked her history, and she'd had horrific abuse of the system and abuse of narcotics. And I was bothered by that. And then I went back in to check on her, and she could tell that something had changed, and she started getting belligerent with me, and she started like, I need more pain medication. And I was like, why do you lie? Why did you lie to me? So I'm not nearly as emotionally affected anymore when they lie to me, because they all lie. But again, the second lesson is you have to believe everybody. At least initially, you have to believe everybody. Because sometimes they seem like they're lying, and you're sure they're lying, and they have real pathology, and they're about to die. And that sucks for us. Because it becomes really hard to diagnose this stupid pathology when they're such liars. But we have to believe them. We have to. Or else people die if we don't believe them, at least initially. Next lesson. When you call a surgeon, you'd better be thinking like a surgeon. I told this story to most of you. I called Dr. Curtin about a patient that was like 37 years old, and told him that she was a week and a half post-op from a cesarean, that she had this intra-abdominal fluid collection that looked like an abscess. I told him that she had this small bowel obstruction, associated small bowel obstruction, and that she was hypotensive. She was like 65/30. And that I'd given her 2 liters of fluid, and her blood pressure came up to like 70 or 75/40. So she was not responsive to my fluids. I've started her on Zosyn, and she needs to go to the OR. He said, okay, I'll be right over. And he showed up, and he pulls me in the back room, and he says, Dr. Garrett, did you forget to tell me something? And my mind reeled, and I was like, I was really nervous when I called you. I tried to make sure I told you everything. It's like, did you forget to tell me about the incarcerated hernia? And I was like, oh, crap. Yeah, I did forget to tell you about that. The radiologist told me about it. I knew about it. That's what's causing the small bowel obstruction, I bet. But in that moment, when I called him, I wasn't thinking like a surgeon. I was thinking, I don't know what I was thinking like, but it wasn't appropriate, because it makes a difference to his management. Whether he's got to fix an incarcerated hernia or whether he's going after an intra-abdominal abscess that's making him septic and hypotensive. And I wasn't thinking like that. I was thinking, whoa, she's sick. I think she needs the OR. Let's get her there. And that was inappropriate thinking on my part. So that was a valuable lesson for me. When I call a surgeon, I better be thinking like a surgeon. I better think what's coming next. What's their management going to be? Because it makes a difference whether he's calling the team in now or whether they're going to try something else and then call the team in. It was like 9 p.m. and he'd already called the team in, and now here he is in this quandary. I messed up. This is the next lesson. There's 2 things that every emergency physician should carry with them at all times. Anybody know what those are?
Reflex hammer's one of them. No? Xanax.
Shears. This is Dr. Malloy, for those of you who knew Dr. Malloy. Shears and a light. These are the 2 things that she said you have to have these 2 things with you all the time. Everything else you can typically have time to find or get or have somebody get for you. But she said these 2 things have saved me so many times. And the moment she taught me that lesson, I was in a room doing seeing a patient. I come out of the room and she's carrying a baby into the ER in a towel, like that's all bloody and wet. And I was like, Dr. Malone, what'd you just do? Apparently, while I'm in this room, this is a moment in residency you don't want to miss, but I missed it. I'm in this room, with some lame nonsense patient, and some guy runs through the ambulance bay and says, my wife just delivered in the car. And she goes running outside and opens the door and finds this baby laying on the seat with the umbilical cord still attached. So, good thing she's got her shears. So she takes the umbilical cord, clamps it off, manually cuts it, ties it in a knot, picks it up, and walks into the ER, and that's the moment I see her. And then later she's like, man, I would have been out of luck without a pair of shears at that moment. So anyway, that was the next random lesson. The next lesson, know what you don't know. Dr. Barclay. I'll be forever impressed at the many diverse and sundry ways varying pathologies can present themselves. It's almost word for word what he said. I tried to get it as close as I could. Ah, the overconfidence of a fourth-year medical student. You have been around just long enough to have seen almost everything. Once. Which I got a kick out of until he said this. Unfortunately, the same dangerous overconfidence begins to creep back in as a fourth-year resident. It's a very valuable lesson. You get overconfident thinking you've seen a lot of stuff. And we forget that we are at the very, very beginning of our careers. A valuable lesson that I will definitely remember as I become a first-year attending. Next lesson. It speaks for itself. You guys know my history. Just don't miss a torsion. Ovarian, testicular, doesn't matter. Just don't miss one. So, ultrasound first. If you think it's a torsion, ultrasound that thing. It's okay. I'm almost done. So you know. Thank you. This was a patient that. Do I need to explain this? How many people don't know this story?
The medical student, isn't it?
Okay. So this was a patient that came into our ER 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago. It was right before the second year started, I think. And the chief complaint was on the nursing triage was 3 penises in my rectum. And I walked in with Dr. Matisse, and in classic Dr. Matisse fashion, he said, so why 3? The guy's obviously embarrassed, and he said, well, I got the first one sick up there, and so I thought I'd try to get it out with the second one, and then I lost that one. So I thought I'd try to get it out with the third one, and then I lost that one. So if you look carefully, obviously there's one, right? If you look right next to it, here is a second one, adjacent to it inside the colon. And then here is a third one. So it's not that valuable of a lesson, but an amazing moment of residency. One of the next lessons, eat burritos slower. We had a patient that ended up with a complete occlusion of his left lung, secondary to eating a burrito really fast. Complete mystery. So when you're out there, Moe's has amazing. Since then, I've tried the home wrecker like 7 times. We sucked an amazing amount of burrito out of that man's lung during the bronch. So eat them slower. Next lesson. Treat your nurses with tender, loving care and listen to everything they say. Next lesson. Don't listen to anything they say. In other words, listen to everything they say, but somehow figure out how to remain completely objective, which is an impossible task, but try to get as close to that as possible. I can't count. There's probably about, I don't know, probably 100 patients in my 4 years that I got told were a drug seeker and they need to go home. Or they were just here for the same thing. What, you're going to work them up? You're just here for the same thing. Obviously, we've talked about the myriad of reasons why you have to remain objective and have to go in, with complete objectivity and give that patient the benefit of the doubt and give them a better workup if they're a bounce back, not a dismissal because they're a bounce back. But then, like the first lesson, don't miss things that they say. Sometimes they'll tell you amazing pieces of information that will be the crux of the case. And don't miss that. You assume that they're giving you bad information more often than not, and then you miss really important things they say. They'll save your back. There was a moment in my second year, beginning of my second year, I was with Dr. Martone, and I had never run a code by myself up to that point. I'd always have my attending with me. And we were on a night shift, and we were working a code that just barely started. And then this second code without a call-in rolls in the door. And Dr. Martone looks at me and says, "You got this?" And I said, "Yeah, I got this." She says, "Okay, I'm going to room 10." Or to room 12. I stayed in room 10 running this code. And at that moment, I looked up at my 4 nurses that were with me running this code and prayed that I had treated every one of them well. And thank heavens I had, because at that moment they were way more prepared to run that code. They'd run hundreds of codes, almost all of them by that point. And all of a sudden I'm in charge. And thank heavens, my first code that I ran by myself, I hardly had to do anything. Everybody knew the protocols, and it was a piece of cake. And I was shocked at how easy it was. But thank heavens, I didn't have nurses that I'd been mean to, that were ready to stab me in the back in that moment. And we have tons of those moments. So that's that. Another lesson. 2 extreme perspectives on death. The first one, before medical school, during my medical school prep, I gathered tissue from donors. I collected skin grafts and long bones from donors for transplant. And I did it for about a year and a half and saw a lot of donors in that year and a half. But there was one in particular that was this homeless man, and he was about 45 or 50, and he had died from who knows what. I don't even know. And we were taking taking the skin grafts and the long bones from him, and then the story kind of played out as we were working, and I found out that the mom called our company back, and they were trying to figure out what to do with the body, and his mom called back and said, "We don't want the body. You guys can just dispose of it." And I was shocked at that. That was the first time I'd ever seen such disregard for a person. I couldn't believe it. I was like, what happened in this guy's life that made it so his own mom was like, "Nah, we can just get rid of the body. I don't even need to see him. No funeral, no service, no nothing. Just get rid of that guy." The opposite perspective. I was in a code again with Dr. Matisse, and this little old lady. She was, I think she was 89. Her name was Rose. And we were running the code, and it looked like she wasn't going to make it right from the get-go. I think she was in East Sicily, and then the family came cruising in right as we were just about to call it. And this little old guy that had to have been close to 90, he came up, and we turned to him and said, "We're sorry, we're not going to make it." We showed him the heart on the ultrasound and said, "There's no cardiac activity, we got to stop." And this guy just started bawling, and he said, "No, please, 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 no." And we stopped, and we disconnected the bag, and he started doing compressions on her. And he starts blowing in the tube. We'd remove the bag. He starts blowing in the tube, giving her breath and saying, "Rose, please don't leave me, please." He starts kissing her eyes, saying, "You're so beautiful. I don't know what I'll do without you." And this went on for for like 5 minutes, all of us started choking up watching this. And I thought, wow, what an amazing dichotomy. And Dr. Matisse turned to me and said, man, may we all live so somebody cries like that over us when we die. So, tackling your worst fears. Residency is full of terrifying things. And I learned an amazing lesson a couple months ago. Everybody knows the bad case that Dr. White and Dr. Hawagner had about, 3 months ago. I was sitting on a shift with Dr. Hawagner, and it was a night shift. And all of a sudden, this 5-year-old rolls in with her parents with inspiratory stridor. And I'm sitting just slightly behind Dr. Hawagner, and both of us jump up, but he runs to the bedside. And he's at the bedside way before I get there. And he's immediately taking care of this little girl. And I stood back and just watched him. And watched him tackle this very worst fear. The very worst thing that could happen to you in residency happened to him. A 5-year-old died from some freak thing, from pulmonary edema from croup. Something that we don't plan for. We don't brace ourselves for that death. And all of a sudden, the same patient rolls in the door. And before I can get there, he's on this patient. And immediately doing things to make sure that he can save this little girl. And that was an amazing moment for me to stand back and watch him tackle his biggest fear. Without hesitation. He didn't even think twice about it. That's my son, Max. Learning under pressure is painful, but remarkably effective. There was a moment in probably the beginning of my second year where I needed to do a central line with Dr. Matisse. And so I took the ultrasound over, and I was starting to do this right-sided IJ on this patient. And I'm sitting there about to get it, and Dr. Malloy walks over. She walks over and she starts tapping on the ultrasound machine. And she starts taunting me. And I'm by this point I've only done 6 or 7 maybe of these central lines, so it's not like I'm super confident. I'm sweating underneath the scan already. She starts tapping on this ultrasound machine. She says, "You don't need this. You don't need this machine. You can do it without this. In fact, I got to take this. I got to go do an ultrasound. Can I take it yet?" And Dr. Matisse is standing there. He's like, "Give him a minute. Give him a minute." And I sit there quietly, trying my hardest to just focus on this vessel, praying that I'll cannulate this vessel, and thank heavens, about 10, 20 seconds later, I thread the vessel and got it. And Dr. Matisse looked at me like, I am so glad you just cannulated that vessel. But it's moments like that other professions have a hard time simulating. It's hard. I think probably the military puts people under pressure. I assume they do. But other professions don't. They can't do that. It's hard to put people under pressure and say perform, and we're going to train you while you're doing it. And it's an amazingly effective way to learn, and it's so painful at times when you fail, when you don't get that freaking IJ. And you start sweating worse. When you're trying to sew up a kid's face, and he's 4, and he's screaming, and his parents are looking at you like, "Did you put the lidocaine in?" And you're sweating. That maybe it's just me, but I sweat. When I get nervous, I sweat, and that makes it worse because then they can see me sweating, so I'm like more nervous because they can see me sweating. I'm just sewing up that stupid face, but man, it's an effective way to learn. That's all there is for that lesson. And this is a quote from Nelson Mandela on this topic. When the water starts boiling, it is foolish to turn off the heat. Next lesson. We don't have the luxury of bringing our personal lives into work. Dr. Matisse taught this lesson to us early. He said, I don't care what's going on in your personal life. He said, I do. But when you step into the emergency department, I don't care. You leave whatever has gone on, you leave that at the door. And I heard him teach that lesson. I thought, yeah, that's what we do. We leave it at the door. No problem. No problem. We can do that. And then my grandma died. While I was on shift. She didn't die while I was on shift. She fell down a flight of stairs, and they found her at the bottom of the stairs. My grandpa found her at the bottom of the stairs, and she'd been there all night long. One of my favorite people on the planet. And she was so healthy. She was 89 and so spry, and her mind was so alert. And she'd had shingles, but that was basically the only thing she'd ever had wrong with her. I was expecting her to live another 10 years. I was supposed to be her doctor when I finished. I was supposed to take care of her, and I was supposed to keep her from dying. And I got a text from my dad, and I had about 4 hours left in the shift. And it said, Morg, I hate to tell you this, but your grandma took a fall down the flight of stairs, and she's had a lot of bleeding in her brain. She has a skull fracture. She's been intubated. She's on a ventilator. She has a clavicle fracture and a humerus fracture and a pelvic fracture. She took a bad fall, and they don't think she's going to make it. And I got that news with about 4 hours left in my shift. And in those next 4 hours, I had a STEMI, I had a massive GI bleed, and I had a super septic little kid come in those next 4 hours. And I didn't cry. I'm not much of a crier. I didn't cry at that moment. For those next 4 hours, I couldn't stop thinking about that lesson. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I said, okay, I've got to leave this at the door. And it took everything in me to put that at the door and focus and say, okay, I will mourn her in 4 hours. I'll mourn her. But for right now, I got to work. And for those next 4 hours, I saw those patients. And I don't know that I gave them the best care possible. It was hard for me. But I kept seeing patients. I kept doing my job. If Dr. Matisse hadn't taken us aside and told us to do this, I probably would have gone to my attending at that moment and said, I got to go. My favorite person is about to die. I got to go. But we're ER doctors. Nobody's there to back us up. Nobody's there. When somebody comes in, most of the time when they show up, this is the emergency of their life. And they're expecting you to be their ER doctor. It becomes a little bit mundane at times for us, but not for the people coming in the door. When they're coming in the door, this is an emergency. And it's a big deal. And we have to perform. We have to step up. And even when our favorite people die, we have to say, okay, whoa, this is this person's emergency, and I have to be their doctor. This was the attending when I was a medical student in the ER. This was my very first ER attending, Dr. Pasternak. And I asked him, I was undecided at the time. I wasn't convinced I wanted to do emergency medicine yet. I thought I'd like it, but I wasn't convinced. And I asked him, so why emergency medicine? Why did you choose emergency medicine? And he looked at me and he got a little choked up and he said, people bring me their most prized possession, talking about kids, little kids. So he's like, people bring me their most prized possession in the whole world. when they don't know what to do and they ask me to help them. I said, what an honor. What an honor to be the only person that knows how to help them at that moment. Like, I can't think of any other job that allows me to do that. So I do emergency medicine. So at the end of the residency, these are the little tiny people that make me feel like everything's going the right direction right now. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone home from work with just, with a heavy heart and burdened. And I step in, I open that door, and they don't care. They think I'm the king. They think that I'm the coolest guy they've ever met. And they just want to play. And that's a phenomenal feeling. To step into little teeny kids' lives that think you're the bomb. They just want to play with you. That's all of them last week, or 2 weeks ago. And it's stuck. All right, last slide. Sorry you're not in this photo. I showed up like 2 weeks too late. But you're in there. So you guys, yeah, sorry you're not in the photo either. I don't know where you were that day. But you're in there. We semi, go to war together when we go into residency. And we go into the pits together, and we fight battles together, and hardly anybody else. I get a little bit frustrated when I talk to my parents about what I'm doing, because they can't comprehend what on earth it is we do and what on earth we go through. But you guys know, and I know that every Wednesday when I show up, I'm going to have a group of people here that knows what we're going through, what I'm going through. And I wish I had time. I've already taken like an hour and a half. I wish I had time to go through every one of you. You've been phenomenal comrades and partners in the pit, so to speak. And I'd go to war with any of you. And I would bring my kids to any of you. And I mean that. You're phenomenal ER doctors. And I love all of you, and I will miss you like crazy, and I'm sorry I'm leaving. But you've changed my life. You've taught me that not only can I do hard things, I can do impossible things. And the things that I have learned while I've been with you people will stay with me forever. And they have left an imprint in me so big that I will be a changed person forever because of you guys, because of what I've had the pleasure of doing with you guys. It's been phenomenal. It's been more than I could have ever hoped. And I'll miss you guys a lot. Thank you.
Thank God there's only 3 of you. That was remarkable. I'm at a loss, believe it or not, right now. So I think we'll just end with that. Thank you. Let's get some lunch and come back.